Okay, welcome to another hallway hangout with the FSE Outreach Program. It is April 4th, 2023 for anyone watching in the future. These are just casual conversations where we talk about all things site editor related. And so today I'm very excited to have Blake join us, who's going to talk about a practical real world example of moving to the site editor. And we're just going to have a conversation based around that. Folks are welcome to bring up questions or their own experience moving to the site editor. But where we are with phase 2, which is the customization phase before moving into phase 3, which is collaboration phase, it's a really interesting time to be talking about people switching over, especially with 6.2 coming out last week, removing the beta label from the site editor. So this is part of continuing that conversation, kind of getting some real world insights. I talk to folks all the time about this, but I think it's helpful to kind of get this recorded and to have a conversation where we can talk to folks who are doing the work themselves. So with that, I want to introduce Blake, who's been an awesome FSE Outreach Program community member, all things related to early adoption and higher ed, and giving really great feedback all on the way. So I'm really excited that you're joining us. Do you want to introduce yourself and then just dive in?
Yeah, totally. So I've been very excited about full site editing project since it began, pretty much since I saw it, the first little post about an idea. And I run a web development company called Decubing, and we have focused on WordPress development since I think WordPress 2 or 3, like way early on. And we have kind of grown out into more consultation services, but we work with mostly organizations that have lots and lots of websites or lots of web pages. And part of my day-to-day is trying to get people to adopt new technology. And that's a big kind of pushing driving force for me. And so I have been following and working with Dan for a pretty long time, trying to figure out how we can get all the great FSC features onto production projects over the years. And I'm happy to say that now clients are actually reaching out to me because they've heard about full site editor features and they want to use it. And we're starting to see kind of a transition from people being very wary and going to all the great other editors out there to really wanting to use the core features that WordPress has offered and that you, Anne, have done such a great job of explaining to a larger public. So I had the great fortune of working on several sites recently that work on kind of full site editing features. James from one of the great organizations I'm working with, Kronos, is here as well. But you know, I think in the last 3 weeks, we've had, I'm just counting them, 7 different sites moving to pretty much all full site editing in production. We're using, you know, we're not trying to create themes for any of these projects. We're trying to use as much as this full site editor as possible. We are using child themes for some of the projects, but mostly we are just kind of taking 2023 and using that and incorporating content. So some of the challenges that I could talk to, and you know, I really answer questions more than anything, but just a quick introduction to what I've been doing is bringing lots of content that either wasn't in WordPress or was in WordPress into full site editing kind of capabilities. And then the kind of second major piece is building sites completely from scratch and using the site editor to manage all the design iterations. So what we've tried to do, and the dream that I think I spoke to Anna about early on, was to not really use a design kind of mock-up platform. Our agency, we had the full kind of wireframe to mock-ups to coded templates workflow, but we really wanted to cut out most of the early phase and bring our designers into WordPress land. And that's worked. You know, some of the projects that we're hopefully going to be launching this month are completely designed within WordPress. Literally, we have never gone into Figma or anything. And there are some challenges that I can definitely speak to, specifically around just when a designer is used to a tool like Figma and they're having to come into WordPress. Um, uh, Different navigational kind of issues is usually where it is, and like wanting to create really dynamic navigation that they're not able to do out of the box. And then we've done, in this process, I've also been trying to think about what a web agency looks like in the site editor universe, and like how a web agency can provide services when clients can do so much on their own. And where I really do want to train clients to use the full site editing capabilities to we want to be as much of a teacher as anything, and it's very exciting to realize that, to really spend a lot of time that we would have spent developing on teaching and training clients to use WordPress and to become designers on their own, and to work with designers as consultants and advocates for their vision. So that's kind of the wheelhouse that I've been working on. So I have some very big projects I can speak to, of like bringing thousands and thousands of pages into this platform. I have smaller projects of building sites from scratch. And then I can have the middle ground projects of figuring out how to turn a WordPress site that was built with something like Beaver Builder or Elementor into a site editor project. And I've done all of this, and I've been excited in following the path of site editor as we've done it. And I must say that I think right now, this month, and with the latest release, we're at a point where I can bring projects into production and be pretty confident that they're going to be able to stick with some of the site editor features. And that's a confidence that I haven't had before after many years of working on this. So I'm very excited.
We're coming up on what feels like 3 years or 2.5 years. Yeah, I have so many questions. I'm curious what pain points, or what, as you've done a number of sites, like how has your process changed, or how have you gone about it differently with each iteration? Especially with the spread, like that's something that I look at a lot whenever I'm talking to folks, is I don't want to just be talking to end users. I want to be talking to agencies, to higher ed, to enterprise level, to store functionality, to, a site that has changed multiple times over the course of a couple of years. Like we want as many different use cases as possible. So I'm curious, with the different spread that you have, what's shifted? What have you iterated on with each launch site? Like, what does that look like?
Well, I can say right off, the biggest challenge is teaching people a new tool. And, it's coming into Gutenberg, there was already some fear and trepidation and a lot of anger, honestly. And to whatever size website the clients I've been working with are using, if they've used WordPress before, they're a little bit feature fatigued. And so a lot of our work and my work, specifically with clients that have used WordPress before, are training them and also getting them very excited about getting involved with the outreach program like you're working on, and bringing them into a culture of collaboration and experimentation, which clients don't usually want. They kind of want the job done, and that's it. And so I've been lucky enough to have great clients that have appreciated some of the experimentation that is just involves with adopting new technology. And I have to say that I've kind of focused the clients that I'm lucky enough to kind of choose the clients that I work with on projects. And I've very much focused on clients that would be likely to adopt new technologies and learn about new technologies, and excited to design as well. I haven't taken as many jobs that want to build a theme for a WYSIWYG editor. And we've actively first tried to educate why that might not be the future-proof way of working. And then second of all, we've just not taken those projects, which is a pretty big change in the way that we've done things. And then there are technologies. So looking at the plugins that a client is going to desire and what plugins are mission critical has become the first step in a lot of migration projects, because a lot of plugins just aren't ready to support the site editor in a way that really will provide a benefit to our clients. So, we've done a lot of early work and just looking at the infrastructure a client is already using, and making sure that they can support the site editor. It's also been exciting to figure out budgeting, because we're doing a lot more consultation now than we're doing development. And so it's changing the fabric of the people who work with me, of they're becoming more ambassadors to site editor features than development, than doing hard development. And then when they do hard development, for instance, we had a project that needed massive migration of posts into WordPress, and that required very custom targeted development. And we were able to scope it out like we would an app. And to be able to use more modern development workflows and technologies as well has been a really cool thing about going on a site editor adventure.
And before I jump on more questions, did anyone have anything they want to initially ask Blake, or anything on their mind?
Or even speak up. I know that other folks have had this adventure as well.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions. So I'm not sure if it would make sense for me to wait until the end and let you follow up with questions. But
That's great.
I think I have 8 written down already.
I love it.
So maybe I'll just kind of say all of them to start, and then we can just see if any of those are worth diving into at this point, or if we'll get to them later. Okay, so the first one, I wrote little small things. Okay, so my first question was, when are you deciding to use a child theme versus just working in your 2023 as your basis? Just kind of more information on what drives that decision. I'd love to know more about your process on how you're doing your mocks directly in WordPress versus using something like Figma. That's really intriguing, that I would not have considered possible. So even a glimpse into that would probably be really interesting for me. I really am interested in this idea you said of what are web agencies in the future? Maybe not so much in this conversation, but as a topic in general. I would love to hear more about that in another conversation. And then one thing, and this goes to some of the questions I have that aren't directly what you've mentioned. You said that you're finally feeling really confident in using full site editing for production sites. And I would like to know why you're feeling that way now. So what kind of change that is actually driving I finally feel confident, what clicked for you. So some of the things that I'm researching right now, because we do custom themes and I do a lot of blocks through ACF, which I don't love, but it's kind of what I felt has been safe. So the things that are holding me up maybe that I would love to hear more about are if you do anything with images. I do custom source set sizes for all of my images, and I feel kind of limited by that with blocks. I have some trepidation around doing some advanced block designs and patterns and how I would implement that with my clients, where they are hopefully not going to go in there and change something and break everything on accident. So just an experience share on that sort of thing probably. And then my last thing is, but I don't think I have enough experience yet to fully understand what I'm asking here, but I kind of have a concern that new features are going to come out and they're going to break what I've done. And what would maintaining that kind of look like? So I know I just asked about everything all at once.
No, this is cool. This is great.
Yeah, it's been, everything you're saying is just super interesting. And I just have all these tangents I want to go on.
Yeah,
I will leave that there.
I'm going to add to that list so that it's there just in the list to go. Because Blake, I'd also like to know, apart from what Lauren just said, is I'd like to get some information about how you approach the plugin issue, because this is a huge, this is single-handedly the most irritating part of this entire process, because I think that WordPress as a brand WordPress, as in the new site editor, is labeled for issues that have nothing, that are not WordPress issues. They're actually plugin issues. And what ends up happening is those plugins like I've spent the last 2 weeks going back and forth with two particular plugin developers, talking with their tech team, just asking what did they think their timeline was, because my client uses their plugin and they also want to use full site editing. And basically, if I was to share the email, you would be surprised at the attitude of, well, take it or leave it. There is absolutely, the site editor is not ready for production. And if you're going to do that, then you're an idiot. And that's basically what I got in an email. So there's a piece there that goes way beyond just what we're talking about with the site editor. And, we're talking site editor, we're talking block editors, we're talking. So I think, just when we really discuss this, that transitional point, and I think to Lauren's point also, is ACF has been one of the few plugins that has transitioned in a way, because it allows PHP thinkers to have a sense that they've got a monkey bar to hold on to swing into block development. They don't necessarily want to deal with, like, the idea of having to learn JavaScript or React, just in a sense of to understand how to build a custom block or how to transform a custom plugin. These are things that really we need more conversation around, because it's just not happening. And there has to be some discussion about how to work with plugin developers. I mean, it's not fun.
Yeah, I want to touch on, do you mind, Blake, if I just jump in here a little bit, just to focus the conversation a tiny bit? Because some of this is like, we're talking about broader WordPress community concerns. We're talking about, how to deal with clients, all that sort of stuff. I think Blake in this conversation is best positioned to not necessarily talk about the wider WordPress space, because I think we could end up in a rabbit hole there. But I wanted to say, like, I want to hear about these things. So if you have a weird experience, like, one of the things I do is I will reach out to people individually when they post articles about the site editor, or if I get wind that, like, a support doc says, like, we don't support this, I'll reach out and say, hey, I'm connected with a bunch of developer advocates. What do you need? What would help you adopt? All that sort of stuff. So if you have names of plugins that you've tried to use that it's getting blocked, I would love to personally reach out to them, get them connected, and see what's blocking them, because oftentimes something is blocking them, whether it's lack of awareness about what's being done and how they can integrate, or if it's truly like there's a bug, or they haven't moved to blocks yet and it's really overwhelming and they're worried about the maintenance, and it's like starting something new versus starting something old. They don't know the migration pathway. They don't know how to deprecate things. Like, all that stuff is something that right now, up until this point, with phase 2 and with the site editor being in beta, I think folks have been holding off to see when it would be in production. I think in the next 6 months to a year, we're going to see that change, where the early adopters have adopted. Now there's like documentation in place, and now I think we're going to hit a point where we need to do both proactive outreach to folks like that, and I think we'll have more examples, right, where it's like, oh, that's how that plugin did it. They added block templates. Okay, cool. I can see that in their GitHub repo. I need that for my plugin. I'm going to reuse what they did. That makes a lot of sense. And so I think we can kind of start building up these examples, but I think you're right. And one of the things I know with 6.2 being out, and before, and also after phase 2 ends with 6.3, ideally, there's going to be a lot of work done to get those resources in place and help continue to get the WordPress community to come along. Because yeah, I can see where it's frustrating, right? Like, technology is always moving so quickly. Now we have AI to worry about. Like, there's a lot of stuff happening right now. I did want to note, just because, I'm going to drop 2 different resources that I'll link to here. One is this create block package, and a lot of work is being done by a couple of contributors, including Gregor's and Ryan Welcher, just as an example. I'm sure there's tons of others, but those are the 2 folks I talked to about this a lot. They're doing a lot of work to make it easier and easier and easier to create blocks. And so I would follow up on that documentation. Also, if anyone wants to talk directly with either of them, happy to make that happen as well. I'm just thinking about, Lauren, your example of running into issues when you're trying to create blocks. And Ryan Welcher does some amazing, like, Twitch streams where he talks through different things. yeah, please add more questions. I'll also link to this curating the editor experience, because it touches on that point of agencies, which I think will be interesting to kind of dig into if Blake, you've used any of these things. But one of the things you could do is create patterns that then, so they don't completely, a client doesn't completely mess something up, you can lock it down and basically content lock it, meaning only content, only editing. So someone drops a pattern in and you're just editing like the header that's in there, maybe replacing the image, but you can't move or remove things. So there are more and more tools coming out like that. And that's part of what, again, I think this next phase, the more we can make that a bit more robust, ties in nicely with phase 3, where a lot of locking stuff will come into play and revision history and all that sort of stuff. So I just wanted to kind of get that out of the way. And then I think Blake, in terms of, you can answer any question you'd like, but I do think focusing it on the experience of the agency owner and talking about it that way, I think will probably be a bit easier framing. Is that cool with everyone? Okay, Blake, take it away.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've also looked at the questions here, and I've also written down some of the questions. I think that first of all, child theming versus like just using a regular theme. I can speak about just my experiences, because I've looked at a lot of best practices and talked to a lot of people, but in my experience, which might not be the best ways of handling it, is you know, I try to work against coding as much as possible in this full site editor world. I'm trying to do as much inside the editor as possible and really push the limits. So my rule on child theming is like really try hard to make it work, really push the boundaries with 2023 especially. And the reason I particularly like 2023 is I'll get more support from the community if I'm using 2023. So I really try to like push the boundaries of that and then see where the boundaries are hitting. And if things get to mission critical, then of course I'll go into child theming, of course I'll go into coding, but I'll also I'll document where we coded and what we've done in a lot more of a explicit way than I've done in the past, because I'm seeing I do you know, I am from like the beta alpha days of the full site editing project, or the Gutenberg days, where things change so quickly. So I make sure I know where I did something that probably will change. And my familiarity with the project really benefits me at this point of just kind of knowing where the trends are changing. For instance, fonts is like a big one that comes up a lot, of like probably fonts will be moved in a nicer way. I was like building child themes to just handle fonts for a while. That wasn't, you know, now we have this great plugin to handle it. So, but I kind of knew that because those are the conversations I was seeing. And then with plugins, so, and specifically with my experience of, okay, I really need to build something special. People on my team luckily have experience building a Gutenberg block from scratch, but when we don't have that experience to play, we will use the tools that I like is like ACF's block builder. It kind of allows people who are just using PHP to build a block, and it does it pretty nicely. You know, I don't know if it's super future proof, but like it's been a nice stopgap. We try not to build that many custom blocks. Instead, we rely on patterns. And like Anne was saying, some of the points in that curating the editor experience stock, we try to employ as much as possible. Specifically, you know, our process with users or administrators who want to design or know about design is to give them all the tools to do that from the get-go. Then larger organizations like a big university that has a bunch of students using it and doesn't want to change their branding requirements, we will lock down pieces of the editor, but we try not to as much as possible. The question of like why we're confident in production sites now is literally just because I'm constantly, every time there's a new release, every time there's a new feature, I'm constantly testing things. And like I will spend my own weekends like seeing if I can get something to work for a client project that I have to do the next week. And honestly, if it gets to Monday and I don't have it working, I won't do it. And what I'm finding now is I get to Monday and it's working and I can like give it to the client. And like that's great. We even have been going with the latest release. We've gone away from the Gutenberg plugin, which is a huge leap too. We were using Gutenberg as kind of a stopgap. It's been liberating to move away from that. The image sizing is something that we think about a lot too. I don't have a good solution for that world. We a lot of CDN kind of options are what we've been going for, and just like the way we deliver images. That's been the best solution that I have. I think a lot needs to be done. I also work a lot on accessibility. That's like my passion, kind of what I work in. I do think if I'm going to flag things that I'm like trying to fill in gaps for constantly, it's just the accessibility aspects of the editorial experience. You know, readers who are users that are relying on screen readers, I'm not going to switch them to full site editing yet. And that's kind of a pain and something that I probably should be more active in the WordPress community about, but it is one of the big pain points. And yeah, I think that probably goes through, and then web agencies of the future and mocking up. That's a pretty cool one. So I have, since I started working with a WYSIWYG editor, have had the dream of not using anything but the editor to mock up things. So I'm a little bit of a weirdo in that, like, I really, really want to cut out Adobe and all the tools, not because they're not great tools, but because it's an extra piece of time that I've always instinctually thought could be in. I don't like to transfer content from one place to the next, and I like to have one source of truth. And I share a vision that like WordPress can be that source of truth. So I like to enter in my content in one place and then never have to enter in content again. And the way that we've handled that is we kind of look at our first pass is always 2023 with no style changes, nothing, just getting the content into 2023, just getting the content into WordPress as best as possible. Once we have all of the content into WordPress, then we'll start adding the style elements that we can do with the site editor. So I was going to say typography, but you have to add a plugin for that. But like, but a lot of like colors, like buttons, different things like that. Everything that you can do in the site editor, try to make it as interesting as possible and visually different from 2023. And we'll also apply patterns and pieces like that. We'll give this to the client, knowing full well that they're going to have a lot of complaints and like have a lot of instinctual desires. Usually it's around typography, but sometimes it's around layout. And then we listen to the client and talk with the client and let them know the positive and benefits of changing style pieces. So, you know, if a client wants to radically change, like one client wanted to do torn edges on every div that was there. And so we explained to them that like VSs will probably limit some of your abilities in the site editor, and it will kind of fix you to this and it'll add cost. And if they're still cool with that, then like we go with that. We also give a lot of different options. Like, well, why don't we just like have a new style that is just, you know, that we can use for some places of torn edges. And then we will build custom elements. Usually it's building a plugin. So like we have been using custom plugins to hook into specifically around like accessibility and making sites more accessible and making sure they're more accessible. We've done a lot of work around that, but honestly, in the 7 or 8 sites that I've been doing a full site editor, we haven't gotten to the point where a client is like, this just won't work for me. And that's exciting because we've not done any mock-ups. We've literally led them through. And the other big thing that I will say is metering client expectations is one of the biggest tools for the trade right now, which is, telling a client that this is new technology, but it's technology that will position you better in the future, is something that clients like, and they understand that there are limits with the technology. And we haven't really had the pushback that I initially expected. That said, I've also been preaching the gospel of the full site editor for a few years now, so people know what to expect when they come to me.
I'd love to know more about what you're like when you're having that initial conversation, and maybe scoping out a site. So let's say you have someone come to you brand new, and it's like, this is my setup. Like, what are your steps on your end that you go through to evaluate whether that client makes sense to use the site editor? And then also what else do you say to them? Because I'm used to, I'm like so knee deep in this that, and I don't work with clients because conflict of interest problematic. So I feel like getting that sense of how you communicate to folks can help possibly influence some of the ways we're talking about to the broader community, like thinking about like the marketing team for WordPress. Because I think this is a pivotal time where we need to start, in my mind, I've been thinking of it as like inviting folks into modern WordPress and like giving people the tools where they can feel confident and comfortable, and whether it's a migration pathway or documentation or what have you. I'm curious just how you talk to folks and that evaluation stage.
Yeah, so there's three kind of adventures that we usually go down. The first one is when an organization comes to us with fully designed mockups, and they say, we want this, and it's a Figma template or something. And that is becoming more and more rare because we're getting more and more well-known for kind of everything from scratch. And when they come to us with mockups, we say, well, we can't really do pixel perfect representations of these mockups. We usually wouldn't be able to anywhere, but the tools are getting better. I mean, the funny thing that's happening is while site editor gets better, tools get better for translating a designer's mockups into code. And at most cases, it's already code. But a lot of times we have to kind of break it down and say, well, it's not gonna be pixel to pixel. If you want pixel to pixel, we can do that. And we do that by integrating with like Webflow when they have the template, by putting a HTML block or something like that on a page. And they're happy with it. And we went, so the short, with the adventure of the client giving us a mockup, what happens usually is we say, this is great, it looks really beautiful, and we probably can get it into our system, but it's not going to have the full editorial controls that you would if we built kind of from the scratch. And so far, and we're on new days of this, clients have been okay with that because the mockups that they are bringing to us that are fully beautifully designed are for one-off kind of reasons, like an event, or usually events. Actually, events is all I'm really thinking about. And so we just take that mockup and then drop it in a custom block or a HTML block if we can do that. And then the second tier of client is the client that wants a website designed and built from scratch and isn't a large organization. And for that, we then talk about our process being, we will put all the content, we'll work with you to get all the content into WordPress. And usually that happens with the client. So initially, we'll have set up 1 to 3 hour calls, which is different than we've done before, to like talk about content, look at different WordPress sites. And then sometimes the client will just say, we want to dump all the content in a Google Doc or something. Oftentimes though, the client, since it's a smaller organization, it knows they're going to be editing things. So once they get in there right away, so they end up writing out the content. We say, don't worry, it won't look pretty at the end. We'll handle that. And they put in content. Then we have a meeting with them that is more of a design focused meeting and talking about patterns we can add to the content, how we can make the content more dynamic. We look at sites that they like, and that iteration process, depending on how large the site, will just keep going on, where we sit down with the client, do some work with them, do some work offline, depending on their comfortability, and then just like iterate based off of that until we get to a good option. And then we'll launch the site with that. That's been the bulk of the work that we're doing. And then the third kind of adventure is with a big organization. So like a university or, you know, an organization with lots of pages already set. And so with on the big organizations, we become more of teachers than anything and consultants. And we are usually working with an IT team that is already, you know, either fully aware of WordPress or hasn't or wants to be aware of WordPress. And so for those bigger organizations, depending on, it's literally whatever they want. It comes sometimes, you know, on a recent project, we built out, you know, I think about 80% of the site without too much feedback from them. And then we did a teaching piece, and now we're kind of like in the midst of their folks getting used to the full site editor. And eventually we'll come back to them and do kind of a finishing piece. With other organizations, it's been not us not doing any coding or any actual WordPress work, just giving lessons and guidance on how to use it and trying to employ best practices. And those projects are taking longer. Like we have one project that's probably been about 6-7 months in the cooker, and it'll probably be another year and a half, because it's a pretty big university and they're trying to pull everything into WordPress. But our relationship to that is just as a consultant for teacher. We're coming in, we're giving demos, we're talking people through it. I'm sending things when you post something, Anne, that I think they would be interested in, I send it to them. So those are the three adventures. It's like from a template adventure, the kind of small build out adventure, and then the big organization adventure that all have different workflows attached.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear about. I mean, I'm selfishly glad to see Ed back on here, because I feel like Ed, you're doing a version of that within higher ed specifically. Like you might be, and you're like, no.
I mean, but we don't build though.
No, but you're the teaching and the like talking about the site editor and getting people interested. It's a very like it's almost like you're an embedded Blake inside of what you're doing. It's
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, I was teaching a student the other day and was like, okay, so you were going to make like a book depository where students are going to all submit these, you know, books that have some kind of diversity, equity, inclusion background. And so, okay, so now let me show you Gravity Forms. We're going to use Gravity Forms and, you know, custom taxonomies to create this layout. Now I've got to show you how to create a template part. We're going to make this so it's a reusable, bouncing back and forth, so that like, okay, this is how it's going to look in these places. So she's much more comfortable working in Figma. So I'm letting her do that. Though the making things look exactly the way she wants in the full site editor is still very difficult to her, even though she's a very artistic person. So that's a barrier for me right now is I'm letting her work outside of there and then being like, okay, nope, we can't do this. We can't do this. Here's what we can start to modify to put it in the full site editor. Let's take some time and, let's create some groups. I need a row and I need a stack in the row to do this thing that you've kind of instinctually designed, but she can't figure out all of the intricacies that like every single block has all its completely different controls, and I need a row and I need to go in the side settings and find the one to get them separated apart. And then I need to group these two together so that these two can be close together. Like getting the layout to look like you want in that full site editor takes a lot of creativity and a lot of deep knowledge at this point. So I'm kind of trying to take that away from her. And I think I heard that a lot in what Blake was saying is like, he can set that up and start to show them that. And then once he does 90% of the work, like for the big teams, he can let them give it, like once it's set, like you don't need to edit the templates every day, but you do need to edit them and understand what they're doing and what the hierarchy is in order to get your site looking the way you want it, at least to start.
One of the interesting things that I've had, one of the interesting experiences I've had with students particularly, and like literally what you're talking about, I've been in that situation, but is taking students through the process, the thought process of the designers of the block editor, and like talking about blocks as like fundamental levels of design. And one of the cool things that I've done a lot, and also how I've trained my brain, is like thinking like a designer of Gutenberg, and going through that, because it's a really cool process, and there's some really cool theories behind that. And if you are a design geek, doesn't mean you need all the bells and whistles of Figma. You might just need the theory for why this is a block, and how we interpret that. And that particular approach has been really helpful, especially with students. A lot of seasoned designers are like, yeah. But the students, people who are like really passionate, excited about design right now, have loved to learn about that.
Yeah, as you all are talking to, one of the things to take it from like a university to like a large scale thing that we had David Bowman talk about. He works for the WordPress VIP at Automatic, and there's actually a public repo that I really want him to come on and do some sort of demo at some point. But this is a really neat tool that basically it's a script designed to export a design system that you create in Figma to translate it into theme JSON. And so you can keep the two things up to date. So if you do have a team of designers who are just like going wild in Figma and keeping things updated and changing around the design system, like, this is the background color, this is the foreground color, like all that sort of stuff. This is the spacing we want. And then you want to just export that into theme JSON. There's a tool that they created, and they're actually using it to manage styles for, I think, the main VIP site. And it's a really kind of cool solution, thinking about using the site editor at scale. And so that's another, I'll add links to that in the notes, but that's another thing to think about with this too. It's like some folks might want to dive in directly, some folks might need time. And for larger scale teams, there are tools being created to kind of make this a bit easier. I wish we could some of the stuff we can't include in the main WordPress resources because it is linking to things in a way that's not a community tool, but I do want to mention that.
We'll just add a comment here. One thing is using something with the technical side. Another thing is the artistic, which part of the brain are you using? So right now there's a lot of experimentation going on with the grid layout. There's some PRs for that. I was trying to search for that. There's some different types. So when a grid layout is added to Gutenberg, that will help a lot for the artistic kind of person to be able to make more of the layout they want to make, because you can take, for instance, Figma other layouts and just be able to use some kind of grid for that to make more of more exactly what you want to create. And that's going to help a lot for the artistic person to be able to create the design without having to have a lot of technical knowledge. Because as it is right now, it requires a lot of technical knowledge to get into it. So the person, my girlfriend, she's more artistic, and when there's a lot of technical stuff, she'll just say, this is too hard, it's too much. So adding the grid will help a lot, and there's various explorations happening with that, and that's going to make a lot of open it up the site editor or Gutenberg for a lot more people.
Yeah, and I'll note this is actually I was going to launch a official call for testing separate from building a block theme expiration when 6.2 came out, but I'm actually waiting because I want 15.5. I think 15.5, the next release, and this is part of what we're going to test. Because I'm
really excited for this.
Yeah, this is a really cool thing.
From real artists will be like really excited for this. I think everyone who uses WordPress, that's the way query loops should be done. If you're, it's been so hard with the current Gutenberg to get just like two things that line up next to each other to be the same height, right? I mean, that's been a difficult thing in Gutenberg right now. So to have those grids and be able to mess with it in that way, I saw a demo of that at a previous hallway hangout. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I think that's going to be huge. And I'm keen to get feedback as soon as possible because we want to, ideally, if we could land something like that in 6.3, that is a robust, elegant, intuitive solution. I think that'll also help with a lot of the pain points we've seen around creating layouts in the site editor, whether it's like you're creating a simple part or you're creating a post. And I know the table block is also part of that. I know that's some of that stuff is also coming up. I want to be mindful of time. So like I try not to go too long. So probably about 10 more minutes. So I'd love to hear from folks like what would be most impactful to talk about, because I feel like we could talk for hours about all of this. We might have to do another session. is anything burning right now? I'm gonna go through my notes real quick.
I have another question. Of
Please,
course.
yeah.
So I was curious about takeaways from working with blocks on huge sites, specifically like not server side rendering blocks, because I work with food bloggers primarily, or really any publisher. They tend to have easily 400 individual posts. And if something needs to be updated, like it's not ideal that they have to go in and manually update every single post. So I was wondering if anyone had some experiences of like, I guess just working with blocks in general. I mean, I have a lot of blocks on their site, but I server side render my ACF blocks. And I want to move to the full site editing to core blocks and just producing patterns, and maybe how, if anyone has had an experience and what that has looked like.
I mean, I can just talk about, I've been loving templates. And so that's kind of how I've been dealing with content that is, you know, this might be a little bit different, but content that is going to change across many different pages. Like I have been using a lot more templates than I thought I would. And you know, that's kind of how I've been using it. And then we've also, like, that use case we were talking about has led to several like custom blocks from scratch, specifically when they're using external information, or we want to do like any kind of API information that's going to change. We have used custom blocks from scratch.
Yeah, I linked to a guide around propagating updates, and one of the things that I would recommend to anyone doing this, and something that I think we need a learn WordPress course on this or something, but around propagating updates, before you do anything, thinking about what content needs to change, thinking about what content doesn't need to change, and the mechanisms of each. If you spend 10 minutes thinking through what you're creating with that in mind, you'll save yourself hours of headaches, basically. Because it is tricky. Sometimes you do have to do like deprecation, or but that guide has a lot of good insight. I also want to note real quick, this is getting into more like nerdy experimental stuff, and I think I linked to this last week, but there is this very interesting issue here that touches on some of this. So I would definitely recommend digging into it, but like this is a good example. So like introducing patterns where the content is configurable on a per instant basis, meaning you could edit an individual pattern, but the design and layout is shared and can be globally updated across instances. So like one of the things that's also being worked on right now is thinking about these sorts of mechanisms on a larger scale. And I do think patterns will play a huge role in this. And potentially there's been talk about, you know, could we consolidate the concept of reusable block, template part, and pattern in a way that makes sense? And maybe what it is that like you only have patterns and you can choose for a pattern to be synced or not synced. What would that look like? How would we communicate that in the interface? How would we say like, okay, you're editing this pattern that is synced across your entire site. Maybe a notice pops up, there's some like friction in the UI. What does that look like? And there's a lot of just design thinking on this right now. And obviously there's like the technical underpinnings. And then also obviously this all relates into phase 3. So like, how do you manage this in terms of multiple people editing something and locking something down versus something else? But I just wanted to call out this issue because this has come up a fair amount, and yeah, it just impacts a lot of different parts of the interface. But yeah, you can see this possible unifying concepts for reusable blocks where everything is a pattern just with different sync properties. So this is on the mind, and obviously a big undertaking. But I think one of the things that's come up in previous hallway hangouts is just how much terminology you have to know. So when you're jumping into something, it's like, oh, you need to create a template part for that. And it's like, what? People don't necessarily want to know the inner workings of that. And then I think if you can explain, oh, you want to create something that's synced across the site, that's a way better way of communicating it. We can consolidate those things. We should not put the burden of knowing, you know, a dictionary of terms on a user. Like the interface should be clear. And I think we're slowly moving in that direction, but that's like a future look. To be clear, I don't know when that will be implemented, but I think it's worth mentioning. Yeah, this is, I remember in the very beginning stage of the outreach program, I was working on the very first call for testing. and was moving a site over to a block theme just for fun. And I had a moment where I was like, I really want a template with reusable content. Like I used some phrase that basically smashed them all together. Like I want part of a template that's reusable. And I was like, oh God, this is exactly what I knew very quickly that we were going to start running into these issues with conflicting terms. But yeah, this all relates to how you want to update content and being mindful
And
of
really
that.
difficult when those terms mean 90% the same thing.
Right. And like basically the difference between that is like, well, template part has like semantic meaning, but yeah.
Well, but it doesn't have to, right? You could make a template part that was all full of static content and then reuse it exactly like a reusable block.
Yeah.
You could do that. Might not be, you might run yourself into other problems later. You can put template parts into pages and don't have to put it in, template parts aren't limited to only being in templates. So in a lot of ways, you could use a template part for almost everything that a reusable block is used for, right?
In theory, kind
but then
of.
there are
it's
things
like,
that you,
yeah.
but then there's things you could run into problems with, like, so it's like 95% the same thing, but the 5% matters when you finally come to that use case. That's a really difficult thing to explain the difference between.
Yes. You need to be careful with like accessibility and like a different, how things are labeled with markup. So yeah, Lauren.
So going back to the terminology now, because I'm very confused. So then just to clarify, as an example, inside of an individual post, a blogger puts 4 related posts and then there's a block and it lets them do that. And I want to be able to, if we change the design of their site, to change the look of that block across everything. Because that content is unique, it's not a reusable block. And I don't think it counts as something that would be a template part, like we're kind of talking about as an option here. So I don't think that would apply where it could be a template part because it's unique content. That's the kind of instance where I'm like, well, I want to be able to update that across everything without having to edit posts to change the style. Like let's say it's a column 4 across and then I want it to go like up and down or something in the new theme. That is kind of the future look you're giving us. We could maybe do something like that in the future, but right now I'm understanding correctly that I haven't just missed a feature that exists. Am I asking a question that you understand?
I'm thinking about it from the point of view of like, so I used to work, just for full transparency, on Jetpack, mainly on the vault press side of things and the security side of things, but we have like a related posts option. So I was like, I wonder how they do that here. And so like there is a block for related posts. And I think what you're describing, I'm just going to use Jetpack related posts because that's what I'm familiar with. What I would probably do is like create a reusable block, have a design that's like set, and then put the related posts in there. And in theory, in my mind, if it's working correctly, it should pull the related posts from the content that you have, but then you could update the design from the reusable block side.
Yeah,
so that I guess I would use reusable block for that.
My question was more like anything that would need to be custom input in it. So like, yes, we've used related post plugins, but like we generally want to have a very specific style, or they want to customize the title of the post for SEO purposes. They want different numbers per post, like that sort of thing. So there might be 6 in one post, but like 2 in another post. So like in any case where they're putting manual content in, there is not currently a feature that lets me sync the design of that manual content if I like change the theme. That's only available in this new direction that's being researched. Because when you guys started talking about template parts, then I got confused if I was completely misunderstanding template parts.
No, template parts are basically like a reusable block for templates. It's like the easiest way to explain that. I won't go into like hyper nuance of that. But yeah, what you're describing, it depends upon the kind of changes you want to make. So for example,
I could use theme.json for like fonts and colors, but I couldn't like change the layout on all of those blocks.
You could with reusable blocks. I think it depends on the change, right? So like when my brain is getting broken because like a reusable block, you could change around like the background color or how different things are positioned in the reusable block, right? And that could update across everything. But let's say
only if the content was the same.
Right. Once she breaks that reusable block to be different,
to be a localized, that's
right?
what I'm saying. That would break. Yeah. So if you add a reusable block and then make an instance that's local to that page, yeah, then it's not going to update all the way across. And that's where this future thing is kind of looking at, is like, how could you bridge that gap? Exactly. Yeah. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Kind of feel free to ping me after, because this stuff does get confusing. And I did show some like future thinking stuff that probably like
No, it's
inflated some
everything
concepts.
has been super, super helpful.
Okay, good. Sometimes I'm just so deep in this that I worry I'm speaking nonsense. So does anyone have any final questions, or would anyone be, I mean, with a show of thumbs up or thumbs down, like I think we could probably continue with this kind of topic for another discussion. I don't know if folks would be into that, but got a thumbs up. Okay, cool. Sweet. I'll look into doing this again. Maybe you can drag Blake back into more fun.
Okay, I have one question
Yeah.
about. I'm Fahim from Bangladesh, and I just want to know about if I create a FSE theme with that plugin that you already shared on the channel. So if I create a theme and make a package, can I upload it to the theme? The theme repository.
Yeah, you can. So using the Create Block theme plugin, that's actually what Automatic, again, I'm sponsored by Automatic, that's what the designers are using. So part of why that plugin was created for a community project was because like folks on Automatic side were using so many block themes, and then folks in the community were doing the same thing. We were all running into the same problem. So that Create Block theme plugin is meant to be used for folks to supercharge their efforts to create block themes that can be shared into the theme directory. So yeah, you could use that expiration, create a block theme and submit it to the theme directory pretty easily, which is kind of exciting. So yeah, that's exactly. Also, thank you for joining. I think it's like, is it like 1 a.m. your time or like 2 a.m. in Bangladesh?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, wow.
That's
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for
yeah.
joining that.
Yeah, I was joining so much. The meeting in the WordPress.org. In Slack channel in the midnight from Bangladesh, mostly in a hosting channel.
Wow, that is very cool. Awesome. Well, let's wrap up. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time and the fact that it's 1 a.m. for someone on this call. But yeah, I'll set up another one. I also, Ed Beck, I saw that you mentioned having something around like terminology and teaching folks to say editor. I think that'd be a great topic, and that might be a natural next step. We could bring in folks from different training backgrounds, agency backgrounds, higher ed, all that good stuff. So stay tuned for more. And I really appreciate you all joining and coming with all the questions. So
Thanks, Sam.
end it there. Yeah. Thank you so much, Blake.
Thank you.
See y'all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.